Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Lauren Burke-McCarthy. I am a senior data science lead and AI strategist at Further. We are a data cloud and AI consulting firm focusing on finding the value in your data. And in sometimes that deals with AI, which is where I come in. So what I want to talk to you about today is AI risk management as a product, which may be something that you've heard before, maybe something that I just made up. I don't think so, but let's get into it nonetheless. So today I want to go through a couple topics. The first off is the changing nature of AI risk. Then I want to talk about why AI risk management needs product type thinking. Then we'll talk about how we design with our priorities in mind. And then we'll talk about some of this AI risk management in action. And finally, end on how we build a culture of responsible AI and how that kind of connects to risk management overall. So, a little bit about me. Like I said, I work at Further. Outside of that, I am an AI governance professional, AIGP, through IIPP. That's a certification that I got earlier this year. And it's a really exciting development in the AI risk management, AI audit space. Outside of that, I am part of a community known as Women in Analytics. We host an annual conference called Data Connect. We have a podcast called Women in Analytics After Hours that I host. And it's a great way to connect with others in the space, other analytics enthusiasts, other women who are making an incredible impact in the space and stay on top of all the trends. Outside of that, I am an instructor at Denison Edge, which is an offshoot of Denison University focused on career and skill building. I teach two different AI accelerators focusing on industry and innovation, and I also teach analytical strategy in business. I've been in data science, AI for a little over 9 years now, all across from healthcare, especially healthcare tech and product, pharmaceutical space, the retail e-commerce space, supply chain, customer experience, and enterprise technology. So I've seen a lot of different things. I've spent some time in the intersection of data and product, now AI and product. And so what I really want to get into today is what we can take from some of those learnings and how we can use that to make AI risk management better, more successful overall. And so, first, I want to touch on what this talk is and is not going to be. So, it's not going to be how you can build your own AI risk management product. It's not going to be all about product thinking, and it's not going to be all about AI. And most importantly, it's not going to be all of the information, activities, steps, resources that you need in order to enable successful AI risk management. There are more resources, practices, people that need to be involved in order to do that well. But what this talk is going to be about is going to be an intro on how we think about the changing nature of AI related risks and how product thinking, how the principles and approaches that we see a lot of times when we're working in the design thinking or product development lifecycle might enable us to approach AI risk management in a slightly better way. So first off, let's talk about the changing nature of AI risk. So AI, even though it seems like it seemingly came out of nowhere, generative AI came on the scene so fast, right? It's been around for a very, very long time. And like other technologies, we're learning how to work with it. We're learning how to embed it into our day-to-day operations. We're learning how to use it to make us better, especially how we can be better as humans. And so AI is not going to replace humans, but we're moving toward a place where there's going to be more day one expectations for AI. As more folks are being exposed to the capabilities, to the tools, we're going to see future workspaces where folks are coming on and from day one, they're either using AI or they're expected to upskill others. So roles might even be dependent. But the crux of the matter is looking at all of these industries that are exposed to AI-driven automation, a lot of folks are going to be working with or reliant on AI tools. And so when we think about where we're at with AI and Gen AI in general, there are really, really high expectations. So McKinsey and Co. just put out a study, and leaders over the next 3 years expect to see a very high investment into AI. Over 92% expect to increase their investment. And from that investment, they expect to see significant ROI. 87% expect to see growth in revenue. And of those, 50% expect that revenue to be more than a 5% boost, which is fairly significant, right? Even if we're not dealing with AI. So, what's the good news and bad news there? Well, the good news is the right investments are going to be what unlocks more value. And that for every dollar that a company is typically investing in AI, they're going to get about 3.5 times back, which is great, right? The bad news is that not every investment is going to be a good one. A lot of projects are still failing. And when we say failing, they're failing in two ways. One is failing to even reach production, and two is failing to provide that ROI that's expected. And so, with those high expectations, we are setting ourselves up to be kind of rearing down this path of AI adoption, AI development. And what that sometimes doesn't give us time to acknowledge, to think about, is the risk that we're introducing within that. And so we're actually seeing an increase in the number of AI incidents because it becomes harder and harder for us to understand how these models, how our systems might break, might cause issues. So the tasks are becoming more complex. The number of black box models that we interact with on the day-to-day are growing. We're losing visibility into not only that process, but also the risks involved in the process. And so this is where I'm getting into that changing nature of AI risk. So with more complex tasks, we also see greater risk. And so with that, I want to differentiate. We're not just talking about the use cases, the things we're building. Yes, we're building more and more complex model. We're doing more things with our data. We're doing more complicated things with our data as we mature. But also, that risk is coming from what we're buying, the tools, the technologies that we're buying, and we're bringing into our organizations that offer us even less visibility and sometimes a greater risk. And so, the less understandable, the less visible those processes become to us as humans, the more trust we put into those systems. And with that trust, we have to have some level of risk understanding and risk management in order to not end up with unmitigated risks. So let's talk about some of the things that we notice when we're looking at AI models and systems. So sometimes AI models can learn the wrong things from data, even when we put very, very advanced guardrails in place. So because models like neural networks, they learn features on their own, they try to understand what helps them make the uh, most likely decision, right? They're based on probabilities and data and statistics. And so they're just trying to connect the dots on the data that they're given. And sometimes that's very different from human expectations. So this is from a simulated experiment that Bloomberg did with resumes. And even though they changed information on the resumes that were input to ChatGPT, they still found that there was bias within this from even the data that they removed. Even when we're trying to remove the bias, sometimes models can still be connecting the dots in different ways that we might not be able to understand. I'm seeing some comments coming in, which is great. And so on top of that, in some cases, the machines can actually learn patterns that we as humans can't see. So a lot of data collected in the healthcare space is from white males. And so this was a study that was done to try and see if that could impact model performance. So what they found out was that models could actually identify these self-reported race from individuals within these data sets, even though the experts in the space, trained radiologists who were looking at these x-rays and images, could not. So even removing some of these sensitive features that are associated with some of those more biased outcomes cannot even mitigate all of the bias that might be introduced. And so that leaves room for limitations and therefore consequences. And the final thing I want to say about what models can do is from those patterns they learn, sometimes they make decisions that humans would never make. So this was from a landmark study where models were used to computer vision models were trained to try and identify cancerous and non-cancerous lesions, so moles, for instance. And so the interesting thing about the training data set is that a cancerous mole always had a little ruler next to it, and a non-cancerous mole never had a ruler. So the model looking for the cleanest way to differentiate between those two classifications ended up narrowing in on the ruler as being what it's going to make its decision on. And so this is a great example of why interpretability is such a key aspect of risk management, because if we don't know what's influencing the decisions and those decisions impact human lives, we could possibly be allowing models to be built that influence decisions based on the wrong factors. And so generative AI on top of that has introduced new risks. And this is from additional exposure, right? It's not just the way that we're using AI, but also in the ways that Gen AI can be used against us, around us, for us, to do tasks for us. I think I see some questions coming in. I'll leave some time at the end, though. Um, and another thing I want to mention with Gen AI, that risk compared to traditional ML is much more user-centric. So consider how machine learning has been used in the past, right? You've probably had it, you've probably had ML enabled technologies, apps that you're using on the day-to-day for years and years. A great example is Google Maps. But you wouldn't worry about your employees putting your company data into Google Maps, right? But with ChatGPT, that's a lot more not only accessible, but the ability to do something like that to um, allow access to sensitive data into that type of AI system is at a much greater risk because the user now has that much more control in order to make that decision. But thankfully, with all of this growth in AI capabilities and usage, we're also seeing a rapid fire growth in AI legislation. There are bills in many of these states, and there are also bills that are at both the national level and the locale level. So in the US, we see a lot of bills at the state level and a lot of state level regulations. So some things have been passed already around automated decision-making systems and high-risk systems, and we will continue to see more of that. But with this change, we're seeing this pressure, this need for organizations to navigate this policy regulatory landscape that's rapidly changing, and they have to figure that out fast. All right. So now let's get into why AI risk management needs product thinking. So traditional risk management, and this isn't all risk management processes. I know we have different lenses for enterprise risk management, but it's more traditionally, it's very standardized, it's static, it's top down, and it's oftentimes reactive. And so with AI risk management, we cannot work off a checklist because the checklist is not even close to being done growing. That AI risk landscape, like we mentioned, it's evolving rapidly, and Gen AI is becoming more and more accessible in different areas of our lives, in different apps, in the different ways that we interact with it. And that legislation, on the other hand, is also maturing rapidly, which means that we need something that matches that pace. And so when we think about AI risk management as a product, what we really mean is we need something that's iterative, it's adaptable, it's human empowered, it's user centric. And so we can do that by evolving it like we would a product. So with feedback, versioning, and with an outcome focused approach, which is how we approach developing products for people, because the risks we're mitigating are oftentimes being mitigated with the end user, with the people and the center of that picture. So some of the core product principles that we can think about when we're considering how we map, some of this AI risk management into that more product thinking lens is first off just an iterative nature. So we don't have to mitigate everything at once. We can't, and we should acknowledge that there's no way we can do that. So small continuous increments are absolutely the way to go. When we think about risk controls, so when you get into auditing, when you get into checkpoints, when you get into setting up standards that should be met as you're developing, you should approach that with a prioritization, test and evaluate type of lens. We also want to always focus on the value. So we could spend a lot of time looking at all of the different regulations that are coming out, looking at all of the things that we could do in order to mitigate that massive checklist of regulations that could possibly apply to us. But what is more valuable to focus on is looking at the risk domains that are relevant, looking at the specific regulations that apply to that, and looking at the risks that arise by either dealing with those or not dealing with those, and then focusing on that value and letting that drive us forward. And so when I say human centric, I know we all have probably heard of human in the loop, right? Human in the loop as guardrails, human in the loop as a stage in evaluation. And I want to introduce human centric as an add on to that. So when you're thinking governance, when you're thinking risk management, it has to be something that the humans in that process can understand and can execute on, all of your involved stakeholders. Sometimes governance, sometimes risk management audits can feel like a test that your stakeholders are set up to fail. And that's not something you want when you want everyone to be on the same team trying to mitigate those risks. So you want it to be something where everyone in the process feels confident and empowered. And the final piece is consider the life cycle. So we don't consider AI risk at one single stage, right? We don't know what risks are involved at the start. We don't know what risks were involved at the start when we only look at it at the end. So we need to be aware through that entire life cycle, thinking, planning, road mapping, mitigating, and prioritizing in order to do the most successful overall risk management strategy for any use case. And we also want to approach risk management cross-functionally. So you shouldn't just have one person in the room making decisions. You need the people building and developing. You need the people championing and connected to your enterprise risk management. And you need input from the people who are using the solution or who are close to the people who are going to be using a solution. And again, with that product mindset, when we think iteratively and we allow feedback loops to be built in to our risk management approach, we make it easier for everyone to not only feel comfortable using what we're building, but we also know what's not working faster. So some traditional things that we see when we are, tracking performance, we're looking at thresholds, we have some observability, common things we have in place when we're building machine learning and AI models. On top of that, we also want to start collecting some feedback, right? That's a great way to find if there's issues, if there's gaps, if there's pain points. And then when you move on to upgrading and adapting, you don't have to do everything all at once. You can expand as needed. Again, prioritization is the key to all of this. So refine thresholds or conditions as they come about, expand your list one item at a time, update or add controls, and the most important part is when you improve something, when you change something, make sure that you're able to educate alongside of that in order for folks to feel comfortable, empowered, and honestly, like they were a part of that refinement process. Because when risk management is a team sport, it's more likely that you're going to win. All right. So let's talk about a word that I said a lot already, which is prioritization. So let's talk about how we design with priorities in mind. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I think all of this is really valuable information when we're thinking about AI risk management, AI risk in general. So an AI risk is any potential negative outcome or issue that can come about when we're developing, deploying, or using an AI system. And this can affect pretty much anyone, you as an individual, your organization, society, the planet as a whole. And so when we think about all those potential risks that are relevant, that list can get really long. We can have different buckets, we can have different categories, and it can be pretty hard to understand what we need to prioritize and what different ways we even approach mitigating those. So something like an AI risk taxonomy helps us categorize and organize the potential risks that are associated with a specific situation, maybe a specific AI system, maybe a specific organization where you can pull out the risk domains that are more or less relevant to you. And under that, you can even have sub risks under that taxonomy. And that helps you start to categorize and understand where you should be looking when you get started with this. And so something different on top of that is an AI harm. And so a harm is different from a risk. This is a physical, psychological, or other form of damage to a third party that results from the use of an AI, algorithmic, or automation system. So this is specific to the actual consequence. I see some questions coming in. I might just start answering as we go through. Should every company create their own AI risk taxonomy? Well, I won't spoil it, but in 2 slides, we'll talk about just that. An AI harms taxonomy is similar to a risk taxonomy. It's organized at different levels of granularity, the specific harm and the specific sub-harms. So here's a great example of this. And Miljana, we can share the slides after this as well if that's of interest. But basically, you see here you have the different categories: autonomy, physical harms, psychological harms, reputational harms, business and financial harms. When you start looking at specific organizations, reputational and financial harms are some of those biggest categories. And the different approaches you take to developing an AI system or integrating an AI system mean different risks as well. So we can kind of think of the different ways that you can acquire a system on this sliding scale. So in the more traditional sense, you have the build. You're developing from scratch. It meets your specific needs. On the other side, you have buy, something you're building out, you're purchasing out of box from a vendor, your ChatGPT, your Gemini, your Grammarly, for example. And in the middle, you have a boost, which is kind of that best of both worlds. So it's something that comes completely uh, out of box. It's ready for you to customize and configure to your needs, but it doesn't need a lot of full high level development involved. So something like Microsoft Copilot is a great example where you can create your own mini agents of sorts. Google Agent Space is also a great example. Uh, Another thing you want to understand is who engages with which different risks. So again, we'll come back to those different groups: the builders, the facilitators, the users. So your builders, the people who are developing something, they need to know different things. They need to understand different things than the people who are overseeing governance, who are defining standards, who are championing the development and compliance. And then the users, so these could even be your leaders, but this could also be your end users, your customers. These are the people who are really involved with the use of these types of systems. They're using it for decision making, they're using it in daily operations. And so you can see that the needs for each of those individual groups are very different. So some for your developers, they need to know what they can and can't build. They need support for risk mitigation strategies to be implemented in what they're building. They need tools to test and validate. Your facilitators, they need to understand how they can assess risk. They need reporting and monitoring in place. And they need mitigation and risk management workflows in place as well. And your users, honestly, the biggest thing your users need is education. They need to know what they can and can't do with AI, Gen AI specifically, the risks, the limitations, and they need to know that what they're going to be using is trustworthy and is up to par. So I see it called out. And yes, this is absolutely one of my most favorite resources in the entire AI risk space. So MIT has a AI risk repository. They recently updated it in April and they added, I believe, 600 new AI risks and a couple new domains. But they do an excellent job of breaking out not only the high level risk domain, but the subdomains. They go into the specific harms and they also touch on mitigation. They've integrated into this a lot of the most popular frameworks like NIST And so, yes, to answer that question, I highly suggest working as a team to look at the relevant risks, pull in your legal partners, pull in your privacy, maybe pull in an AI or ethical expert to help you understand what risks are most relevant to you. And then from there, once you have those domains, you evaluate them. So you're going to evaluate those relevant domains of risk. And you're going to be looking at a couple factors. Two of the bigger ones are severity and likelihood, and the other is impact. And this is what helps you prioritize. So you think about the likelihood of risks occurring, probability that it could occur. You think about the impact if it does occur. And you think about the severity of the seriousness and the potential harms. So, what could happen if this could occur? And so, when you combine all of these different things for each of those different risk domains and for some of those sub risk domains as well, you start to build out a picture of what what could happen, what's at risk, and what's the potential outcome. And with that, then you start to categorize. And you can say what level of risk is acceptable. You can categorize it in very simple buckets like this that end up having very standard either review processes or mitigation processes. And with that, you can start to have larger buckets of how you look at what's in your taxonomy and how you connect that to what you may or may not need to focus on. And the balance, the risk of doing versus not doing. Yes. So we consider the baseline. So we as humans, we're introducing risk into our decisions, into our tasks, manual processes every single day. Human error is still one of the largest types of error that is present in data. So when we're thinking about the baseline, when we're thinking about the risk and the value, the risk, the cost benefit trade-off, what risk are we willing to introduce to have something that's already at a baseline above the possible level of risk we might introduce with humans? And we're going to introduce new risks as well, but that all factors into that cost benefit trade-off. And so one of the most successful things you can do, and this goes into another one of our product core principles, is road mapping. Plan it out. Think about what's next. So when you put AI risk management on your roadmap, you have a route to success. And so this graphic is not something I made specifically about AI risk management roadmaps, because not a lot of folks have those. But what they do have is an AI roadmap. So 99% from this super agency study from McKinsey that came out in January of this year, 99% of organizations already have some form of an AI roadmap. Not all of them have AI risk management as a critical factor or piece of that, but without it, you're missing a key piece of the puzzle. So for the folks on this call at this virtual conference, let's make sure that you're not missing that piece of the puzzle. So this is some examples of AI risk management in action. And when I say that, I mean AI risk management as a product in action. And so something that I said earlier that I'll bring back now is that AI risk is not static. It's changing. Legislation is changing. New technologies, new ways to use them are coming out. So why would your risk management process be towards that as well? So when you think about some key elements of risk management for AI, three of the biggest buckets you'll see are policies and best practices, assessments, evaluations, and controls and mitigations. So on the policy side, having a policy that empowers usage and you pairing that with education, very user-centric, is a great way to allow folks to get started, to share what you can and can't do, and to open that door to innovation, but while ensuring that it's responsible. And these can be living documents. So let folks know that this is going to change as the trends change, as new use cases evolve, because something that was safe to do yesterday might not be safe to do today. Or, new guardrails, new mitigations might be in place, and now something is safe today. So make sure that you're treating your AI risk and your AI risk management as something that changes as the risk and the mitigations change. When you're assessing not only the risk, but your use cases, what you're going to do with AI, and how you're going to mitigate any potential risks, prioritization also comes back into play. So, as risks emerge, and when you're first starting out, make sure that you have an evaluation that focuses on the comprehensive set of risks. And that's a great place for you to take that risk taxonomy, those risk domains, and tie that to an intake form, a risk checklist, a scoring model, so that when something comes down the pipeline, you can say, all right, based on our priorities, this is good to go, or, let's take another look at that. And then when you think about controls and mitigations, and I have these kind of in those three steps that you can start with, and in that order, it's best to start small. So small triggers, small follow-ups that tie to those checklists, tie to intake. Prioritize the most critical risk. Is that reputational risk? Is it human seeing something that was an AI output that you don't feel was reviewed as well as it should have been? Prioritize those specific areas. Make sure that your stakeholders are equipped to not only know what to look for, to feel comfortable completing them, and to report back to you that they have completed those. And then you can build on that. And again, tie this with education so it's understandable. It's much easier to get people on board with doing something when they know why it's being done, why it's being asked of them, and the value that they will provide when they're doing it. So, where you start when you're thinking about AI risk management from the product's perspective as well is really human-centric and prioritization. So, education and mapping to your risk taxonomy, then getting into that prioritization area, and then finally planning and developing a roadmap. This is once you're kind of past that state, those stages that I talked about on the previous slide. But really, when you're thinking about what aligns with thinking like a product, developing a product, these are the key areas that get you from starting with nothing or starting with something to having something that you can build off of. And so you're not only just going to assess the risk related with AI, right? We also want to think about when we're looking at the risk associated with using something, with buying something, with building something, we also want to think about the value of that as well. And so when we possibly think about the AI use cases we might be bringing, we might be putting on the table, we review that comprehensively and holistically, and we look at the individual areas of risk. And these areas of risk that I've tied out here may tie to some of those areas that you find on the MIT risk repository, on any taxonomy that comes out of that. But things that are both aligned with your goals and industry standards are the key. You need that combination because you don't want to build towards someone else's risk management standards without considering the needs of your own. Some of the other things you can do within that are more targeted assessments depending on where you're at. So AI readiness assessments, that kind of ties into the user-centric, where are you pulling something? Are the folks who are building something understanding, the data involved, the system involved, the end user of that system? Third party risk is a currently but continually emerging area of AI risk. So are you assessing your vendors? Do you know what they're doing? Do you know how they're mitigating their risk? A AI risk assessment can either be embedded in these other processes, or it can be something that you have, as an add-on. And then when you get into AI auditing and risk management, some of the things that will eventually be required by things like the EU AI Act, you have already set the stage because all of these other processes are building you up towards having not only mitigated, but documented all of these areas that you need to be thinking about. And something that's really, really useful is that when we're thinking about AI, a lot of times we think about it as, a new flashy technology. But the great thing about new flashy technologies is that there's been a couple of those before. And so a lot of the frameworks that we have for, especially around auditing, but also around enterprise risk management, around building systems, around building things ethically. We have a lot of great resources that, with a little tweaking, can be really, really relevant to what we need to build with AI and what we need to be thinking about. So, some of the examples of those industry standards that are really, really great resources to pull into while also thinking about, your organization, your needs, and that value are NISTs. NIST has an AI risk management framework that um, has a lot of great assets on top of that. That if you're starting to, consider and dive into what risks are out there, how do we think about it, their measure, manage, map, govern system is a very good starting point. MITRE Atlas, they have a great breakdown of the more attack-based risks that are relevant. So when you're thinking about systems that could be subject to, cybersecurity attacks or data poisoning, they have a list of a lot of the different ways that systems um, could be more robust to that or could be potentially vulnerable to things like that. A new framework or new standard, sorry, that just came out was ISO's 42201. That is specifically around AI system management. I haven't taken a super deep look at this one yet, to be honest, but it is on my list for this weekend, actually. So if you have any questions, you can ask me possibly next week. But in the meantime, if that's interesting to you, go take a look. All right. So the last thing I want to touch on is how we build a culture of responsible AI. And this comes back to that product thinking as well, because AI literacy really is just risk awareness. And so when we think about the humans who are going to be in the loop, either in the loop, assessing whether an AI decision is valid, either using a tool at the end of the day to make a decision, AI literacy is what empowers them, what prepares them, what educates them to be that most successful, most risk averse human in that loop. And that's pretty essential, actually, to sustainable and successful AI development. This was a case where Sports Illustrated actually was generating articles under fake names and with fake profile photos, like this Drew Ortiz who doesn't exist. And when you prioritize responsible AI, when you prioritize having something like a policy that says what you can and can't do, what you should and shouldn't do, that risk becomes mitigated at day one because folks know what they can and can't do. And even if you're not ready to have a whole policy out there, to start with, an entire intake assessment, thinking about your full risk taxonomy, even having a simple set of best practices like this already empowers responsible usage. And this is really simple things like using Gen AI tools appropriately and not using them for unauthorized purposes. And in here, I say with a Gen AI policy, but this could be with any, data privacy or system usage policy, keeping things confidential. When you're using something that you didn't pay for, you're using a free trial, you're using the free version of something, you're paying with your data. And if you're putting your company data into that, you're paying with your company's data, actually, which is probably not great. So never put sensitive data into anything where you don't actually have company guardrails, NDAs, some sort of policy or agreement on. Make sure you're fact checking your outputs, reviewing and revising outputs before you're sharing them, and understanding the limitations. And this is probably the biggest piece that comes into that human-centric element of this because it goes both ways. We can have skepticism, we can have over-reliance on AI systems. So not just understanding, the limitations, but also being willing to accept that, okay, here's the limitations, but here's what you can do to provide value. All of that fits under education and all of that makes your entire team better. And understandability, when we talk about being human-centric, we also kind of get into the user-centric side of things for models and systems, words you may have heard before that are coming more and more coming up more and more in conversations like this. Having systems and models that are interpretable and are explainable help us understand and prevent those black box models. Like that example I shared, where the ruler was being used as the key identifier in whether a mole was cancerous or non-cancerous. And then for documentation, and this relates to AI specific documentation as well. Make sure it's user centric and make sure it's accessible. And accessible also means for folks that are more or less technical, because if someone can't understand something and they can't understand how it should be used, they're probably going to use it in whatever way they want, which is not what we want with AI systems. And some things that are coming out when some requirements of policy, some requirements of regulations like the EU Act and others are requiring things like model cards, AI, data cards, for example, things like these. These are things that if you start building into your practices, if you start building into your risk mitigation strategies for your builders, your developers, when it comes time to have a checkpoint to think about an AI audit down the line, you've already documented everything that shows not only what data you're using, but how it's handled, how you're doing it, how you're working with it responsibly, and the fact that whatever risks were acknowledged, were addressed, and are continuing to be addressed or monitored. And so some of the final thoughts I want to leave with are that risk management does not have to be a roadblock. It can actually be a driver of innovation. And AI literacy and AI governance really do go hand in hand. AI literacy, I consider to be a form of proactive risk management. You manage risk early by letting folks know that those risks actually exist. And again, clear usage policies, sets of best practices, those guide people on what they can and can't do. And they actually do give that green light to explore because people know what they can and can't do. And then they feel more comfortable to integrate and innovate responsibly. And so finally, just going to share some of the best practices around risk management in general. Govern by aligning people and policies, educate, adopt policies, standards, and assess and prioritize risks, not only in specific areas, but also for specific use cases and sometimes for specific third parties. And then finally, when you're driving meaningful risk management, building well is so much more important than building fast. And that means thinking about your priorities, shaping the process, defining the value, defining the risks, aligning the priorities, stress testing with pilots, stress testing controls with MVPs, building assessments one level at a time. And when you're building, make sure that it's scalable and sustainable because that long-term robust risk management is something that you can build to from day one as long as you have that plan in place and you have the right team and that team together understands where you need to go. All right. And that is all of the slides I have. So thank you so much. I think we have some questions.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, please share your question. But that building well versus building fast is such a good statement, but it's also like in organizations because of the incentives and everything, it's like build fast and we'll worry about building well later. So I don't know how much this applies to just or how this will pan out because I agree. It's just that incentives and organizations don't incentivize building well. They incentivize mostly building fast.
Well, if you slow down up front, you don't have to come to a full stop later,
Yep.
is what I also like to think when you're thinking
Cheaper
about that.
to build well first than build fast in most instances, but so questions, thoughts. Thank you, Lauren. This was great. Especially like, I'm not familiar with this topic, and for me, it is to some extent, very eye-opening and uh, helpful to just see this from your perspective. So,
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking through the questions. I think
there are a lot of statements, but
yeah.
and you, I think, answered this some of the questions.
All right. Well, if anyone has any other questions,
Harry, I don't know
but
if Harry has a question or you went off mute.
Now I can restate the statement to a question. So the statement was that AI risk management and privacy risk management, they share a lot. Uh, and the question would be, do you see that uh, also? So,
yes, I definitely do. And I think that also ties into using what's there and adapting what's there instead of trying to build something new. Your privacy folks are already managing data risk, and the data risk that's associated with AI oftentimes is not, it's not coming in about in a different way than the standard way that you see data risk being created, like people sharing things, a model sharing something, information being extracted from a system. All of those things are elements of data privacy, risk mitigation that are likely already in place. And so what we actually kind of promote is combining those efforts and bringing the folks from privacy, from legal, from compliance, from enterprise risk management into the process early on. So you know what's already being done. Because when you think about an AI system, the model, that black box model, when you're thinking about where the specific AI risk comes out that no one is already thinking about, is such a small area. And when you allow everyone else to be brought into that effort, you find that someone's already laid that foundation for, assessing that. So I absolutely agree. And that's like definitely something I promote is, data privacy, legal, anyone that's already worked with some element of risk, get them in there. They're the experts in that space and make sure that their voices are in the room to make what you're building better.
This is something also that Elizabeth shared with us a few weeks ago for part one of these conferences is like, and I think you kind of restated it, that a lot of this needs to be cross-functional. We need to, like, same way that, we talk to teams about like bridging gaps or how we've, between development, testing, between product. I think same principles apply here. And it just reinforces that the way that we've been discussing that teams need to collaborate is going to be amplified with AI. So I know a lot of people are concerned or like talk about agile is dead or this and that. And I think maybe the word and like, the prescriptive aspects of it, but as what we describe as uh, collaborative cross-functional work, I think is going to be more needed than ever to address these gaps and to make sure that we're looking at all of these things, not just from one perspective. So at least that's my observation as I listen to what you guys are sharing. So, any other questions for Lauren? Any other thoughts? Hey, Ade. Yeah. By the
Hey,
way,
Lauren.
Ade, I forget. I should probably ask you at the beginning, but am I pronounce? How do you pronounce your name? Is it Ade?
Uh, Ade. Yeah, you got it right.
I was okay. All right.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thank you. So thank you very much for that, Lauren. Some very useful information. I guess my question to you would be, um, in your experience, how many organizations who are currently, or what percentage of organizations would you say who are currently going for their AI implementation are actually considering these very important things? That's number one. And number two, for those organizations who may have sped off, So I like what you said about, doing the right thing at the right time. Ultimately, we also saw that in Agile, right? People running off and doing stuff without actually working out if it's the right thing. What do you think is going to be or how easy do you think it is going to be for them to then roll back to then rebuild?
Yeah, okay. So the first question is how many organizations out there are actually doing this? And I think something interesting that we're seeing is, governance at a high level. A lot of organizations are starting to establish an AI council, an AI task force, a set group of people who are championing oversight, governance, best practices. And oftentimes they do start to integrate some level of that risk management in there. When you think about these specific practices I included where you're really thinking risk centric, like you're building a taxonomy, you're assessing use cases, you're assessing practices against those risks. That is typically associated with orgs where you see a little bit higher level of AI maturity because they're more likely to have use cases in place where those risks are viable. They already exist and they've been developing models for years and years. Maybe they were ahead of the curve on predictive, but when the risks are there, the risk management we see more quickly follows because people are asking for it. They're hearing about it, they're seeing articles, they're seeing all these studies come through about not only AI adoption, but also the risks involved. And so a lot of times, it really follows that analytics maturity curve as well. And if you see higher levels of adoption and you see some group with governance, they're usually right there behind starting to build. And then I'm sorry, what was the second question?
Yeah, the second one was a bit of a convoluted one, but it was more those organizations that you see who have kind of already gone off without a strategy and laying these important foundations. What do you think is going to be the rollback strategy for them? Or will there be one based on how quickly this is moving?
Ooh, uh, I mean, I think right now a lot of folks now have a timeline. The timer has started on things like the EU AI Act. So folks that are playing in those spaces where some of these regulations are relevant and where these regulations have a deadline where they're going to go into place, um, they're absolutely already having to think about that. When we think about rolling back, I I think what you see more is trying to build around. And that's why I think the build well versus build fast works better. Because when you're trying to build, I don't know, a repository of all the different ways that AI is used across your organization, it's much easier to do that before you say, all right, everyone, go start using ChatGPT, start building custom things and bringing them back. Um, so I think you see a little bit of dependency based on what the organization structure already looks like. When you have something very centralized, very top down, you probably have a bigger picture. When you have something a little more decentralized, it might take a little more time to roll back because folks don't know what's actually happening, and you have to spend a little bit of time talking to stakeholders, kind of going on a little road trip to figure out what's actually out there and what's already in place. Um, so, so yeah, I think when you think about the rollbacks, you'll see it's going to be very much related to the regulations because right now that has a deadline, that has fines attached, and so that necessitates action, whereas a lot of these other activities are more of a quote unquote nice to have, depending on whether or not you have the team, you have the resources, the expertise in order to activate that.